place from which, having once gone, one never returns, and there surrendered to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything has begun, and in whom everything is abiding since time immemorial. Text 5. Nirmana moha jitasanga dosha adhyatma nitya vinivritta kamaha vanparamuta sukadukha samyar gacchantya mudha padam avyayam tat. One who is free from illusion, false prestige, and false association, who understands the eternal, who is done with material lust, and is freed from the duality of happiness and distress, and who knows how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attains to that eternal kingdom. Text 6. Natadbhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yadgatva na nivartante tadama padamam mama. That abode of mine is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by electricity. One who reaches it never returns to this material world. Text 7. Mamaivamso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha manasashtani indriyani prakristani karshati. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal, fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. Text 8. Shariram yadavapnoti yachchapi ukramatishvadaha grihitvaitani samyati vayurgandhani vashayat. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Text 9. Shrotram chakshu sparshanam cha rasanam granam evacha adhishtaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, tongue, and nose and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular scent of sense objects. Text 10. Utkramantam stitam vapi punjanam bagunan vitam vimurdhana pupashyanti pasyanti jnana chakshushaha. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. Text 11. Yatanta yoginaschainam pashyanti atmani avastitam yatanta piyakritatmano nainam pashyanti achetasaha. The endeavoring transcendentalist who is situated in self-realization can see all this clearly, but those who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try to. In text 12. Yadadityagatam tejo jagad pasayate kilam yats chandramasi yats chagna tat tejo vidimamakam. The splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me. So we'll go back to text 2. It's nice. Some of these verses, they're reminding me of the lecture we heard of Prabhupada this morning, where he's talking about one must come from darkness or tamas and come into the light. That one in ignorance, he doesn't know where he came in his previous life, and he doesn't know where he's going in his future life. He's just in this life, and he's just trying to enjoy everything. So try to get to those points that Krishna brought up that reminds me of that. But we'll read text 2 in the purport. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the 3 modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. Report. The description of the banyan tree is further explained here. Its branches are spread in all directions. In the lower parts, there are variegated manifestations of living entities, such as human beings, animals, horses, cows, dogs, cats, etc. These are situated in the lower parts of the branches, whereas in the upper parts are higher forms of living entities, the demigods, Gandharvas, fairies, and many other higher species of life. As a tree is nourished by water, so this tree is nourished by the three modes of material nature. Sometimes we find out that a tract of land is barren for want of sufficient water, and sometimes the tract is very green. Similarly, where the modes of material nature are proportionately greater in quantity, different species of life are manifested in that proportion. The twigs of the tree are considered to be the sense objects. By development of the different modes of nature, we develop different senses, and by the senses we enjoy different varieties of sense objects. The source of the senses, the ears, the nose, the eyes, etc., is considered to be the upper twigs, tuned to the enjoyment of different sense objects. The leaves are sound, form, touch, the sense objects. The roots, which are subsidiary, are the byproducts of different varieties of suffering and sense enjoyment. Thus, we develop attachment and aversion. The tendencies toward piety and impiety are considered to be the secondary roots, spreading in all directions. Well, I'm going to read that again. The tendencies toward piety and impiety are considered to be the secondary roots. The real root is from Brahmaloka, and the other roots are in the human planetary systems. After one enjoys the results of virtuous activities in the upper planetary system, he comes down to this earth and renews his karma, the fruit of activities for promotion. This planet of human beings is considered the field of activities. So all these shlokas, as I mentioned before, and then what Prabhupada's saying here, it reminds me of this lecture that he was giving earlier, because this chapter 15 is describing this banyan tree, where you've seen the picture, right, in the book, where it has this banyan tree and it shows this whole entanglement and gives a nice, vivid imagery to what Krishna is describing, which can be hard to grasp. But when you look at the picture, it's like, oh, it makes sense. So Prabhupada's pointing out how the senses are this, what does he say? The sources of the senses are considered to be the upper twigs, tuned to enjoyment of the different sense objects. So same thing he is saying in this lecture is that we have senses, and the senses are connected to the mind, and then our mind is perceiving things to be pleasurable. And this is what we're entangled in, is just tamagun, ignorance, darkness. And he went on to describe further, which, you know, Krishna actually describes more so in the next chapter, the demoniac mentality, which is more in tamagun, that one takes to an activity which causes suffering to try to diminish their suffering. So, you know, example is somebody's stressed out because of work or bills or whatever it may be, family problems. So then they take to drinking alcohol or smoking intoxication to mitigate their problem. But it's actually something that causes suffering, trying to eliminate the suffering. So somebody who's sober and can see beyond that can clearly see that that won't solve anything. It's just merely temporary at best, solving a problem. It's just like juggling, you know. You have like some hot coals and you're like, oh, I can't hold this, so let me juggle it. You know, you're moving it, like you're getting burned and you're throwing it to this hand and you're throwing it up, and you know, there's like a temporary window in there where you're not getting burned, but you're just getting burned all the time. So the only way that we can overcome this is, it's very nice, because what did Krishna say? He said that in text 3 and 4, he says, the real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this tree with the weapon of detachment. So I was thinking about this, that, you know, he says this tree cannot be perceived in this world. You can't understand where it ends and where it begins, or where its source is. So how can we develop the determination to cut it down with detachment if we can't perceive it? So the question is, how can we perceive it? So we perceive it by hearing through the Shastra. and specifically through the Guru, who's preaching a bona fide message of Krishna coming through the Shastra, illuminating the Shastra. So giving us faith in the Shastra, where that's the source, because in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it describes how when one renders devotional service, one gains jnana, causeless knowledge, transcendental knowledge. And from this knowledge, one develops detachment. So the Shastra is giving us this transcendental knowledge and convincing us that we should surrender our unlimited desires for enjoyment, which actually won't bring lasting enjoyment. Surrender that idea and just take to loving devotional service of the Lord. And if you're not able to do that, then follow the Vedic method, which will lead you to understanding your relationship with the Lord as master and servant. Meaning there's nothing wrong with me not being a pure devotee. It's, in one sense, it's very wrong because it's very unnatural. So it's a how do you say, compromised position. But to accept where we're at on the path and clearly see where we're at and where we need to go to and the means that we need to take to get there. This requires humility and honesty and determination. And this is what Krishna says, but with determination, one must cut down this tree. So we have to realize that we're attached to this tree and that this tree actually is the source of misery. And what nourishes this tree? Prabhupada was describing the modes of material nature, the gunas. And then he gave an example where what did he say? Oh, I flipped to the next page, no wonder. So this tree is nourished by the three modes of material nature. Sometimes we find that a tract of land is barren for want of sufficient water, and sometimes the tract is very green. Similarly, where the modes of material nature are proportionally greater in quantity, the different species of life are manifested in that proportion. So when I was reading this, I was thinking, or rather I was hearing this music outside. So I was thinking, okay, there's the modes of material nature. And like, I was just in India, for example. Somebody's born there, and just because they're born in this environment, they tend to act in a certain way. And they can't even fathom thinking or acting or speaking in a way outside of that, because that's their bubble, that's the world that they're born in. You take them to America, to our neighborhood, for example, they're looking around like, what? This person's speaking English? I can't understand them. What are they listening to? And vice versa. You take the people here and you take them there, and they just can't understand it because it's two different worlds. But it's all within this same banyan tree that Krishna is describing. So because we're born within a certain environment that's connected to the modes of material nature in a certain way, then we're under the influence. And what does Krishna say? He says, Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha, then mudhatma ahankara kartahameti manyate. Means we all think we're the doer, that we're free, that we're independent. I am in control. I am me. I know exactly who I am. But really, we're just a product of our environment. So then the sober person can see what Krishna is saying, what she's saying exactly here in text 8. It says the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another as the air carries aromas. In text 9, the living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, tongue, and nose and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature, but one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. So this is exactly what we're trying to do, is to train ourselves to be able to see this. Not that we just sit and do our little bhajan and chant, our shtika shtika ma 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 Hare Krishna. We could chant how long, but how pure are we chanting? We could do all this service, but what are we doing? We have to train our consciousness to see through the eyes of the scripture. And as we're seeing through the eyes of the scripture, we see that Krishna's words aren't just some words, they're actually totality. It's painting a clear picture of what's going on within our own self, our own mind, our situation, and the world around us at large. There's another verse. I forget where it is. I'll try to find it real quick. But basically, Krishna says the perfect yogi, by dint of his own realization with happiness and distress, he can see the true equality of all living beings. So as we endeavor on this path and we overcome our anarthas, we realize the inequities of material pleasures, that it's always a shortcoming. There's always a reaction to it. You can't just get away scot-free, where I'm going to enjoy and there's no negative reaction. Whatever material enjoyment we're doing, there's going to be some kind of reaction, whether immediate or prolonged. And we can see this in like divine mystical way where there's karma and it's going to come to us, or Prabhupada gives the example of people going out and having unlimited illicit sex and then they contract STDs, for example, or you're drinking alcohol and you get some kind of disease with your liver. So we perceive these things and we don't chalk it off to karma, because we can perceive the actual reaction and it's not like this mystical thing. But karma is the actual same exact thing, but because it's beyond our scope of vision, it gets thrown under this like, what's karma? It's like a mystical thing. But when you understand the Shastra, you understand it's the same exact thing. It's just one is like immediate, one is greater. So as we see through the scripture, it pulls us away from our narrow-minded vision and gives us a larger scope. And by doing that, life becomes, how do you say, navigatable. It's like ships on the ocean sailing, 100 years ago, they didn't have GPS. They didn't have these tools. They would have like a little sextant, I believe it's called, something that helps them like align them with the stars and they can tell where they're at on the equator. Without that, they're just sailing in the middle of a pitch black, dark ocean. They have no clue where they're going. So similarly, without the scripture, it's the same exact thing for us. So this is why Krishna is saying we must train ourselves in this knowledge. In the next chapter, when he begins to elaborate on the qualities of those with demoniac tendencies, what does he say? He says, Shastra vidam utsrija vartate kama kardata nasa siddham avapnoti na sukham na paramgatim. He says that without following the Shastra, Shastra vidam utsrija vartate kama kardata, and one follows their own lusty ways, kama, then they'll neither attain perfection, happiness, or the supreme destination of life. No sukham, no happiness, no ramgatim, no supreme destination, and no, what's the other one? No siddham, no perfection. So when we deviate from the scripture, this is when problems arise. But when we follow the scripture, problems still may come, but we can understand why and how to respond and how to act accordingly so we don't get further entangled in this banyan tree. Like we're actively taking the axe and cutting it down rather than, as Prabhupada said, taking one thing that creates pain to mitigate pain. This is all that everybody's doing. And I was thinking about this after hearing the class, and this is all that everybody's doing. They're trying to forget themselves in some way. They don't know who they really are, so they're not satisfied with their position in life. So we're trying to forget that. We idolize movies and characters that's chucked in fantasy. We idolize parties and drugs and intoxication, or people who are really passionate. They're really going in another direction of really trying to assert their position and have everybody worship them. But it's all things that create pain and misery. And if we hear from the scripture, then we can understand immediately and rectify our consciousness and learn to act properly. then we'll feel the bliss of Krishna consciousness by taking devotional service and chanting Hare Krishna. And if we neglect that, or to whatever degree we aren't able to follow completely, then purification will ensue. I was hearing something recently that it's Krishna's mercy upon us that, say, we're all living at the temple, so then there's certain etiquette to follow, especially being in the temple room. But everywhere, you could say, follows certain etiquette and behavior, Vaishnava etiquette. And we may commit offenses, aparadhs. We may harbor certain feelings of anger and envious and jealousy or misunderstanding of the scripture, and we might not even know it. So then this brings us to a platform of committing aparadhs. But in a larger sense, it's all Krishna's mercy that we commit an offense, and then he corrects us through the reaction where, us committing the aparadh. So then we're faced with the choice of how to respond. Do I take the humble route and take, the purification and, further submit myself to the devotee I offended and offering my obeisances and begging for forgiveness, going before the Lord and, pleading our case, begging for forgiveness, going to Srila Prabhupada, asking for direction and guidance and mercy. Or, we could hold on to so many nonsense ideas that are filled with pride or our misunderstanding that we think we know what's right or what's best. The more that we're just open to Krishna directing us, then Krishna can really take control of our lives. And I was thinking when we were doing this arti is that, we're doing the arti, we're doing kirtan. So what do? We pick up instruments. We're chanting Hare Krishna with the intention, that like, Krishna, please use me as the instrument. So, a devotee's life, it's not that we sit down in the kirtan and, there's the kirtan and then we spin off and go our own way. The devotee's whole life should be kirtan, just a glorification of the Lord in all of our activities. Whether we're dressing the deities, whether we're cleaning the temple room, whether we're cleaning our own space, brushing our teeth, everything we're doing, it should be connected to Krishna in a manner of glorifying Krishna. And if Krishna's put in the center, and what does Krishna say? He says, Saradam Sarva Bhutanam, Bhoktaram Yagatapasam Sarva Lokamaheswaram, Gyatvam Shantim Rich. Oh, that's what he says. Gyatvam Shantim Richati. Says, one who knows this and does this attains peace. It's a shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. It's referred to as the peace formula. We're putting Krishna in the center of all of our activities, who's actually the well-wisher of all living entities and the proprietor of all the worlds. Then one attains peace. And it's very, very nice because it's easy to see in theory, but then even better, it's nice to observe in practice when you're in the midst of devotees. We may be surrounded with devotees where if it wasn't for Krishna, we probably wouldn't be associating with these persons. We might not be friends, in the outside world. He acts like this, he talks like this, he prefers this music, different kind of conditioning, because we're all coming from, like I gave the example of like this neighborhood versus India, we're all coming from a different conditional background. That's all that it is. It's material and subject to change. But if we put Krishna in the center, then all of our problems seem minuscule, and the devotees learn to bond over the devotional service and over surrender to Guru. And this is actually true friendship, because we're actually pushing ourselves closer to the ultimate reality. And ultimate reality is Satchidananda, eternal cognizance, bliss. Whereas material world, as Prabhupada was describing earlier, tamasi, ignorance. So Prabhupada was describing how we're in this ignorance and we need to come to light And the way we do that, apodivyam, we need austerities geared at going towards the transcendental state of, what did he say? Brahma Vidya. And he said when it comes to that platform, then he quoted Krishna saying, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma na Shochati na Kangshati Samasarveshu Madbeshu Samasarveshu Madbhakteshu Madbhaktim Labate Param. When one comes to the spiritual platform, they neither hanker nor lament. Wouldn't that be good? Not sitting here thinking, oh, if only I had that. Oh, I need to do this. I need to get that. Oh, if only I should have did this, my life would be so much easier. If only I didn't eat those extra sweets earlier. If only I didn't eat so late at night. So many things we hanker and lament over. But when one's on the spiritual platform, this hankering and lamenting goes away. He sees everything as Krishna's mercy, and he's perfectly happy in that position. Which makes me think of Lord Brahma praying to Krishna. Tatet nukampam susamikshamano bunjana evatmakritam vipakam hridbhag vapurve vedatan namaste. What's the last line? I'm spacing out. It does end with bhag. It's Pade Mukti Sade Padayabhak. Anyways, when one is rendering devotional service, accepting all the reactions of his past karma. So like I said, one can take to following the scripture and problems still may come. But when one is performing his devotional service and just tolerating all of his karma, seeing it as mercy of Krishna, that, it's diminished from the way that it could be, and tolerating it while going on steady, glorifying the Lord with his heart, his mind, his words, then it'd be really nice to remember the last line, but I know the English, but I mean the Sanskrit. Liberation becomes his rightful claim. Sapade smukta, something like close to that. Because when Lord Chaitanya was correcting Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya after he was lecturing on Vedanta for 7 days, Lord Chaitanya was sitting quiet, just listening, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he said, "You're just sitting there, you're not responding. How do I know if you're hearing anything?" It's interesting, you're giving a class and, people just like spaced out, they're not looking, they're on their phone, you ask for questions and everybody's like, oh, prasadam time. It's like, is somebody really listening or are they just thinking their own thing? So Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he's speaking to Lord Chaitanya and he's thinking like this, like, how do I know you're even understanding anything? And Lord Chaitanya responded, I understand perfectly fine, but what you're saying is just confusing me because it's not bona fide. And then Lord Chaitanya corrected him and saved him from this Mayavad conception of life and brought him to a devotee. But of course, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is the Lord's eternal associate, and he's just playing a pastime, much like Arjuna, accepting this role of being bewildered just so we can learn from this wonderful conversation in the Bhagavad Gita. So anyways, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, when reciting the Bhagavatam, he would change that last line from what is it? Yeah, Mukti Pade to Bhakti Pade, meaning that when one does this of just rendering devotional service and accepting the reactions of the karma, he didn't like the word mukti because mukti signifies like, liberation, impersonal liberation. He put bhakti. But Lord Chaitanya, described how Srimad Bhagavatam is spotless Purana. There's no faults with it and nothing should be changed. But, he appreciated the sentiment of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya after being adamant about taking a bhakti rather than, aspiring for impersonal liberation. So that's just a few thoughts and points. Does anybody have any questions or things they'd like to add, or doubts, or reflections? Yes, Krishna Shravana Prabhu.
Could you give an example of a place where the most material nature are proportionally greater in quantity?
Greater in quantity.
Yeah. In purport, Prabhupada writes, sometimes we find that attractive land is barren for want of sufficient water, and sometimes the tract is very green. Similarly, where the modes of material nature are proportionally greater in quantity, the different species of life are manifested in that proportion.
Yeah, so proportion is significant word because the modes of material nature are always there. It's never like it's less or more, but there's different proportions that are in different quantities. So, for instance, like Rishi and I, we just had to drive like half an hour away and we came back. And like before, I was just in India for a month. And, you know, I was noting how I'm driving here, everything's lush, green, trees, space, nature, clean air. In India, there's just dust and fields and trash and people everywhere and pollution. Within India, there's a lot of great things, which the holy Dham is there, which is transcendental to the modes of material nature. If one is materially situated, you can go to Vrindavan and you can just see poor people, open sewers, trash, pollution. But to a devotee who is able to penetrate through the modes of material nature, they could see there's something much special, much greater there. So the reason why I mention this is, you know, you could see that being somewhere where there's so many trees and green, there's a lot more sattva guna in that sphere of like the field, the nature. Whereas being somewhere, like I mentioned, is it's a lot more contaminated. So it's described in, I believe, the 14th chapter. Prabhupada puts in a purport where the modes of material nature are like the primary colors, blue. I don't know if he says the primary colors, but different shades of colors where yeah, there's different shades of colors and they're always mixing. And with all these three colors, you can make all the other colors that exist. So they're always fluxed in different ways. So extreme is hellish planets and heavenly planets, but the earth is perfect for self realization because we can see these here, many different examples. We can go 30 minutes away and see it's a lot more sattvic in a lot of ways. And we come here in the city and we see it's a lot more passionate, a lot more ignorant, you know. And everywhere we go, we can observe this. And this is the point that Krishna is making when he said the foolish cannot understand how living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. So as we're trained in knowledge, we can see how the different modes are impacting the environment and then how the environment is naturally fructifying in that same way. And, you know, that's how you can really judge somebody, like judge something, the results, the fruits. It's not that, you know, if there's a good prestigious school and they're producing a bunch of drunkards, obviously it's not a good school. Whereas, you know, if a place is more sattvic, naturally you go there, you'll feel more of a sattvic energy. So that's just a few thoughts. I hope that addresses the question. Does anybody else have anything to say? I'll just read the next text. Or I read the text, I'll read the purport of text 3 and 4. Well, I read half the text, so second half. So doing, one must seek that place from which having once gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead from whom everything has begun, and whom everything is abiding since time immemorial. And I'll read text 5 real quick. One who is free from illusion, false prestige, and false association, who understands the eternal, who is done with material lust, and is freed from the duality of happiness and distress, and who knows how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attains to that eternal kingdom. So this reminds me of a Bhagavad Gita shloka. Does anybody know the shloka that I'm thinking of? This is a conversation that they're having. So certain points Krishna mentions earlier, and then he's elaborating on them more and more. So once you see it in a larger scope, you see, there's similar themes and points that are really throughout the Bhagavad Gita. But in chapter 4, Krishna says, Janma, Karma, Divyam, Evam Yoveti Tatvataha, Punar Janma, So Arjuna says that one who understands my birth and transcendental periods in this world, he does not come back here. He goes back to the transcendental abode. So this is what Krishna's saying, and this goes side by side, that we understand Krishna as he is, and we understand Krishna's teachings as they are. So we hear about the Leela of Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we also hear the instructions of Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And he's describing how to cut this tree down and be free from the modes of material nature, be free from this material world, which is just dukkhalayam shashvatam, source of suffering, and it's always temporary. And going to the spiritual world, which then he even begins to describe, where he says that abode of mind is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by electricity. One who reaches it never returns to this material world. So we're very fortunate. We have everything we need. Prabhupada gave us everything we need. All we have to do is just plug in and allow the process to work. I was talking to Prabhu yesterday, is that my realization is that being a neophyte, especially an American, we want something now. I want it now. I want it now. I'm tired of suffering. I'm tired of this. I just, I'm perfect. I got it. I'm chanting Hare Krishna. I'm doing this. Where's the results? Where's the results? And we might not be thinking like that, but subtly, this may be within our consciousness, that this impatience approach, which inevitably will lead us to doubt the process. But if we have full faith in the process and we just follow the process, chant Hare Krishna, worship the deities, put others to chant Hare Krishna, take prasada, boss, done. Do it again the next day. And how do we get people to chant Hare Krishna? We have to read the books so we can understand why we should chant Hare Krishna. So we need to distribute the books to convince people to chant Hare Krishna. And then, like Mathuranath was mentioning yesterday, it's very nice to, have nice prasadam, play the instrument nicely, dress the deities nicely, clean the temple nicely. So then we distribute the books and, get people to come here, showing Krishna that we're actually cultivating an environment that's favorable to take care of people who are seeking shelter. But when you don't have that taste or vision, it's hard. So everybody's attracted to different aspects, but ultimately we need knowledge. We need knowledge, so we have to hear sufficiently from the sadhus, from the shastra, and become convinced in that way. And then when we're convinced that this is the path, this is the process, this is the way, all right, I'm just going to follow my Guru Maharaj's instructions, then material considerations don't even matter. You could be sick on your deathbed, you could be, paralyzed, broken legs, you could be in a temple that's run down and broken in the worst neighborhood of town, and you could still be engaged in devotional service and still see, the greater vision of life. But because we're not completely transcendentally situated, we might be affected by the modes of material nature, which are going on around us, which is all that it is. The building's dirty, it's tamogun. We're hearing the house shake because, people next door are playing music. Yeah, it's really passionate nature. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not like, okay, I'm affected, I'm a demon, I'm horrible. No, I mean, this is natural. We're conditioned by the modes of material nature, so we're affected by them. But we have to see where we're at and how we're affected, why we're affected, and always, most importantly, supersede our intelligence, our observations, our consciousness with what Krishna's saying, with what Prabhupada's saying. And this is how we can know if what we're thinking is right or wrong, because otherwise, how will we know? It's just on the mental platform. This is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. But when we're able to see what we observe and connect it to Krishna and connect whatever we're perceiving and realizing and feeling to what Krishna's saying, to what Prabhupada's saying, then it gives it validity on a deeper scale. And then we can also develop deeper and deeper and deeper meanings to the nuances of the Shastra. It's not that we read it one time and like, okay, I got this portion figured out. I think we know the Shastra. It's clear that we've got a lot to learn, because you can study this for lifetimes and lifetimes and always learn more. I mean, in one sense, we're sitting here reading a book and establishing this connection by reading the book, but in a larger sense, we're connecting with Krishna, and Krishna ultimately is the bestower of transcendental knowledge. So it's not a scholarship thing where I'm sitting and through my own intelligence that I'm going to realize what Krishna is really trying to say. It's only by trying to please Krishna for his pleasure and not my pleasure, then Krishna can unfold the Shastra or transcendental realizations to unlimited amounts. And what does Krishna say? He says, Bhaktimama vijanati yavanyashasmi tatvada tomam tattvato gyatva vishitetadanantaram. Only through devotional service can I be known. So we always have to keep in mind that, by devotional service, this is what's attracting Krishna's mercy and giving us knowledge to free ourselves from this banyan tree, this entanglement. And we may do certain activities, book distribution, studying scriptures, whatever it may be. And we're doing it. It's a good activity. The spiritual master has given us that activity, but we still may be doing it with a lot of pride and passion and thinking, I'm great and my charisma, my skills did this. So then purification will come. And how do we respond to the purification? That's a question, and it's basically said that there's a fire burning, and we need to stay close to the fire, or else we'll get too cold. But you get too close to the fire, you get burned. So we need to stay, near the fire of transcendence, of purification. Like, just to elaborate, where if I'm a neophyte devotee and I could hardly follow the regular principles and I go visit Vrindavan and I want to live there, it's not a good idea. So, that's like being too close to the fire. You're going to get burned because you're going to commit more aparads than you are going to commit favorable, like pious activities and devotional service. And if you're too close, too far away from the fire, you're not associating with devotees enough, you're kind of doing your own independent thing, even though you may be at the temple or whatever, then it'll be hard. There'll be a struggle. So we need to have a proper balance of pushing ourselves and, going closer, but also, okay, like, this is where I'm at. Like, it's okay that I'm not perfect. I'm going to continue following path of perfection as Prabhupada laid out. So that's where the mercy is, Srila Prabhupada and the Parampara. Okay, any final comments or thoughts?
Krishna, what's the latest nectar from Vrindavan Dham and Mayapur Dham?
I mean, there's lots of nectar. So much nectar. Vrindavan, they're renovating the whole temple right now. So like a 5-year project, I believe. They tore down the Gurukul building that was established by Srila Prabhupada, and they moved the Brahmacharya ashram to another place, and all these halls. It's going to be like a big open thing. Like space is really limited in Vrindavan, so it's going to be very nice. It's going to be there to enhance the pilgrimage that so many devotees need to embark. one sense, there's completely no difference between being here and Vrindavan. Vrindavan is a state of consciousness. You can go to Vrindavan and just enjoy your senses. There's like restaurants that are all vegetarian and, no onions, no garlic, and, devotees working there. So some devotees go there and, yeah, let's go here, let's go there, or even going to the holy places. Go see this temple. Okay, take a picture, go to the next temple, go here, go there, and really miss the point that to enter Vrindavan, one has to enter in a proper mood, a proper consciousness. And the best way to really do that is by namely hearing and chanting, but also by rendering selfless devotional service. So it's said that when we go to Vrindavan, we should approach with the mood of doing service. Mayapur, we should approach doing kirtan. Jagannath Puri, we should approach ready for some prasada. Yes. But Vrindavan, wherever Krishna is, it's Vrindavan. Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. So Krishna says that I'm there wherever my devotees are chanting my holy names. So if we are sincerely endeavoring to chant Krishna's holy names, then Vrindavan is right there also. But not to say that we shouldn't go to Vrindavan. Just walking in Vrindavan is the same dust that Krishna was walking on. Maybe we don't have the vision to see that Krishna was really, really there. We have some doubts. But Lord Chaitanya was definitely there. The 6 Goswamis were definitely there. Srila Prabhupada is definitely there. You can go to Srila Prabhupada's house, Srila Prabhupada's Samadhi, where he left his body. Many senior devotees I've heard from, including my Guru Maharaj, say that these are the most special places in Vrindavan. Prabhupada's Samadhi, Prabhupada's house. Sometimes devotees go all the way to Vrindavan and they get so enamored with going to all these other temples and all these other places, but we have no vision to see. And we go there and we just see some dust, a tree, a rock, some temple doing some kind of arti or puja that we don't even understand. But Srila Prabhupada, this is our entry gate to Vrindavan. And fortunately, we can enter that gate wherever we are by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So there's a lot of other stories and other things that I've observed and have happened, but I hope that's sufficient for now. Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Shri Gauranatai Ki Jai. Ansa Kapatarubhya Chakripas and Nibi Vichapatitanam Pavanebhya Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.